Hey, I'm Michael, and this is Michael in the Middle. It's an intergenerational relational podcast for people who are interested in better human interaction. I'm glad you're here. Hey, all right. Episode number 9, Michael in the Middle. And I mean this. I say this most every episode. I couldn't be more excited about the person with whom I'll be speaking over these next few moments, but I sincerely mean it. It's great to have Dr. Rondy Smith on the other side of that screen. And welcome in, Rondy, to Michael in the Middle.
I'm so excited about this. I told you I loved the title of your podcast for a lot of reasons, and I'm a little bit jealous because I think you stole some thunder. I have this little book rattling around in my head called "I Found Truth in the Middle of the Road,"
I
and
love it.
when I saw Michael in the Middle, I thought, well, Michael in the Middle sounds better than Rondy in the Middle. You've got that alliteration thing going on, but anyway, I thought it'd be fun to come and talk.
Yep, but I'm glad to know you already have the book. That's pretty cool.
Well, it's rattling around in my soul, but it'll take a lot of work to get it out, I think.
I had a mutual friend of ours, Dr. Harold Ivan Smith, on a while back, and Harold's always trying to get me to put all these thoughts I have. He's read some of my blogs and things like that, and he said, "When are you going to write your book?" And so I feel that with you. You got this book rattling around in there. When I'm going to sit down and do it?
Well, you mentioned Harold Ivan Smith, so I have to tell you this. I've listened to all of them, and it's so interesting because I know everybody that you've interviewed, but I had to chuckle when you had him on. Here's a funny story. When I was at Trevecca, and this would have been February of 1985, so it was in my senior year. And we had what was just called Revival then. Now it's Spiritual Deepening Week, I think. But he was one of the guest speakers. I don't know if he was the entirety or not, but here's why I remember him. At that time in his career, he was not only the grief expert for the Church of the Nazarene, but he talked a lot about singleness. He was kind of that voice for singleness in the Church of the Nazarene,
Right.
and went to the solo cons and that kind of thing. Well, think of the timing. I'm going to be graduating in June of '85. Bobby Smith and I have been dating for 2 years. I have 2 different assistantship opportunities that I'm trying to weigh. I got offered at Auburn, where 2 of my dearest friends were going, Laura Sweet and Kelly Bowman, or I got offered at KU, which is where you and I shared a professorial mentor in Jim Quiggins, and that's where he did his doctoral work, and I had an offer there. And I'm weighing life and thinking, is this boy ever going to propose to me or is he not? Because I'd like for him to weigh in on this decision. We had talked about, a future together. But I went to this revival service and Harold Ivan Smith spoke on Called to Be Single. And I literally sat there, and our dear mutual friend, Julie Smith, Runyon.
Yep.
My best friend all through college. We were part of this revival service together. Bobby was at home in his apartment. And I drug Julie down to the altar and said, "You got to pray with me because I don't know, maybe I'm called to be single." And literally, Michael, I'm telling the truth. I left that revival service with Julie's blessing, and she had been the one to fix me and Bobby up. It was Julie who had match made, but I went with her blessing. I said, "I think I'm going to have to go and tell him, I don't know, maybe I'm called to be single."
Oh, man.
Some people would laugh and think I called his bluff. That's really not what happened, but I'm proud to say he had already planned to ask me to marry him, because as I'm trying to tell him through tears that I might be called to be single, he says, "No, let me talk to you about a different calling." And he pulled out the ring and proposed right then and there. I messed up his plans for a Valentine's Day proposal the next day. This is February 13th. And literally, that is our engagement story. Is that not a hoot?
I love it. I absolutely love it. And does Harold know that story?
I don't know if he does or not, but after he was on your podcast, I thought, "I need to call him and tell him this story."
I think he would get such a kick out of that, and,
I was not called to be single, and, I didn't but I thought, "Well, maybe I'm supposed to wrestle with this because here I need to make some decisions. I gotta move on with my life."
clarifying moments. When, when did it clarify in your mind that you would wanna go to Trevecca to do your undergrad? Because I mean, I having worked here for all of these years, not just at Trevecca, but in the field of higher ed, those 4 years are like really truly are a bridge between adolescence and adulthood, and so many things that happen after that are determined by where you end up going to college and who you go to college with and that sort of thing. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, our friend Julie plays a little bit of a role in that as well. We were both founding members of an impact team in North Carolina called
Mm,
Multi Ministries. Barbara Tate was the
mm,
first director of the Multi Ministries impact team, and Julie and I both made the team as freshmen in high
wow.
school, and that solidified our relationship. We became best friends over those 4 years. We had known each other before, but that really solidified our relationship. And during that senior year of college, I mean of high school, when you're trying to make all these decisions, and it was a no doubt for Julie she was going to Trevecca.
Yeah.
And for me, I was struggling because I thought I was going to be the next Barbara Walters. I thought I was supposed to do broadcast journalism. I had gone between my junior and senior year to University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill to their Radio, TV, Motion Picture Institute, and it was a scholarship position, and I had scholarship dollars to go to UNC, and that's where I was headed. And Julie just wasn't having it, and she really tried to get me to pray through on God's call on my life to Trevecca, but literally that is what happened. I remember when I saw on an impact weekend, Julie and I were rooming together at a little old lady's house somewhere in North Carolina. I can't tell you exactly where. And we walked into the room we were supposed to be staying in that night. And she had one of those plaques on the wall that said, "You only have one life, it'll soon be past, and only what's done for Christ will last."
Yeah.
And Julie led us through our devotions that night, and it really was a moment of surrendering. I would call that my entire sanctification moment of putting everything on the altar and saying, "Where is my life, Lord?" And Lord made it clear that my life was at Trevecca. And when I think about what I would have missed my whole life. My relationship with Julie, those 4 years then in college, meeting my husband and knowing he would be my life, me finding my life's work, really falling in love with the whole discipline of um, organizational communication and interpersonal communication, and just how that led to so many things in my life. To come back and teach at Trevecca, for 12 years, I taught there at my alma mater, and it's like the Lord, His promises are true when He said you'll find your life at Trevecca. I did. I found my life there. So
Yeah,
that's
in an interesting sort of way, and this happens to me a lot. Because I've worked here so long, it can be confused with mundane or routine to a certain extent, because the rhythm of a college year and the similitude of other calendars that intersect with what I do on behalf of the university. Sometimes it's like, ah, you're still doing this kind of thing, and then when I hear your story and other stories like it, it's like that's that's what I do. I mean, that's part of why I'm still here is because
you.
I hear these stories, and I know it's still happening for other students across all these years.
Yeah, and you played a role. You were an admissions
Yeah,
counselor, when I was in high school. See,
yeah,
you're so much older than me, and, when we would come to VIP days, it was called VIP days on the campus at
yeah.
Trevecca, and you folks who went before us who just modeled, again, I think, how you can find your life here at Trevecca. You all were inspirational, and, yeah, I think you're right where you're supposed to be, Michael. You've been an ambassador for Trevecca your whole life, and it's a great thing.
I'm gonna do it for a while longer. I think I don't know how long. I you're experiencing it for the first time, but being a grandparent, I there are days where it's like, how much longer am I gonna, work the steady year-round job? I kind of want to get free to go see my sons and their families, grandkids. We have 6 grandkids, and they're all amazing, but they're all
And you're
scattered. You
and
know,
you're married to a retired spouse, and I'm married to a newly retired spouse.
yeah,
And I do have my first grandbaby, and she lives in Chicago. So yeah, you start thinking, and it's okay. Sometimes God does his best work slowly, and he starts planting those seeds and
yeah.
getting us ready, and we're moving intentionally. But he'll let us know when it's time.
So let's before we kind of move on to some things that you've done as a result of all the education and experiences that you've had. Um, Talk a little bit about your family. Feel free to talk about your family of origin and now the family that you and Bobby have created together. Are there some interesting things that you have been in the middle of as a result of that? That have informed, I guess, maybe what it is that you do now.
Yeah. Yeah, I was born to pillar Nazarene laymen, and they're modeling excellent churchmanship all through my life was very much pivotal for me. And I was a middle child, when I told you this idea of Michael in the middle. I have often been a champion for middleness is good. Like, there are a lot of great things about middleness. People whine and complain about the middle child or being a middle child.
Right.
I was a very blessed middle child. Um, and we were middle class family, and I'm glad that we were. And I think some of that even plays into, just when I say I found truth in the middle of the road. I think for me, truth for me is often about the intersectionality of a lot of things, and it's where those things collide, kind of in an intersection in the middle of the road, that gives me life. And I think, I'm a very just centric person. I try to be centered and balanced. And we get in trouble sometimes in the extremes. And it's not that I'm not a passionate person, but I can be
Right.
passionate about what's in the middle.
Yeah.
And I don't want that to mean I'm lukewarm. I don't want that to mean I've compromised. But it's like when you talk about, it's a bridge. You want this to be a bridge, kind of to those intersections. And I think about Stephen Covey, and when he talks about synergy, where 1 + 1 can equal 3,
Yeah.
not 1 + 1 equals a half because we've compromised, but it's 3 because we've said, ooh, it's not your way or my way, but it's a higher way, it's a third
Yeah.
way, it's an alternative way. And so I think being a lot in the middle. My parents were pretty in the middle, politically, and so I don't necessarily identify as Republican or Democrat. I really do this whole, I don't know, living in some middle ground. So I think those things definitely, have shaped me. And then, so that's my family of origin. When I say I was a middle child, another thing that really shapes me is my younger sister was born with multiple challenges, and being her older sister by 4.5 years really shaped my life. And I have an older brother who I adore, and my younger sister, our younger sister, actually died at the tender young age of 24, and I
Yeah.
was 28 at the time. And living through that with her, both her life and her death impacted me so tremendously. And then Julie, my best friend, walked with me through that only 2 short years later to have her own diagnosis when we were 31 of ovarian cancer, already in stage 4, and to walk that out with her then. And I say those were my two sisters, my biological sister and my soul sister, and to lose them both in a period of 2.5 years. um, Both of them, their entire lives and their deaths shaped me and continue to shape me. And so, that's some about, I guess, my family and my extended family. And then when Bobby and I got married, he also was he was the youngest of four, but of pillar Nazarene laymen. And it's so interesting how I think, when you're trying to discern who it is you're supposed to marry, I thought, oh, we're both these children of pillar Nazarene layman. That just puts us, we have so much core value or whatever that's the same. Only to begin to learn, after you're married, all the way, oh, wow, that was really different in your household than it was in mine. And how do we begin to merge these kind of different cultures, if you will? You think you have so much in common and you're so much alike, and then you learn that, oh, it wasn't exactly that way. But then we raised two amazing sons, so Daniel and Kyle. And Daniel went to one of my alma maters, Trevecca, and he, did all those Trevecca things that we know and love, and met his wife Lauren Boyer there, and they got married. And so that was fun to get to share with him
Sure.
that shared alma mater. And then our younger son Kyle went to Vanderbilt, and he met and married Emmy Weichert, who also went to Vanderbilt.
Right.
And that is another of my alma maters. My doctorate is from there. And so to get to share the Vanderbilt experience, with them was also fun. If we'd had a third child, maybe he or she would have gone to KU. I don't know. That's the school that got left out.
Yeah.
But it's been tremendous to walk with those boys through their life, and then now get to relate to them as young men. And they brought us these two daughters in love that I adore them both. And it's so great to have four adult children that you have mutual respect, and they teach me so much, and we have the best dialogue. I love it. And now there's a little girl. Team Smith finally got a girl. I had told both of my boys, because we didn't have girls, I said, one of you is going to have me a little girl. So when Daniel gave us the news, he said, I'm the obedient son, Mom. Remember that. I said, giving you a little girl. So we'll see what Kyle and Emmy do.
How do you measure out the work that you feel called to do with making sure that you make time for Bobby and for Daniel and Kyle and their families? What's a good work-life balance for you?
Yeah, it's definitely been one of the biggest challenges of life. I think, first and foremost, Bobby Smith is the wind beneath my wings. I tell him, just under the wind of the Holy Spirit and the wings of the Holy Spirit, just under. He truly, early on in my marriage, it was, I'll say this about him. He wanted to provide for his family. That was his personal mission. He was driven by, I don't necessarily have a certain ambition or calling other than to do well and provide for my family. And so early on he said, so let me come and support your personal mission and your calling, because you have a calling on your life. And then I think he did the same thing for our sons. And he said, I really want to be able to support, their lives. And that's what he's done. And so our boys certainly did not suffer. I don't think they had a very hands-on active father. That may have been why the Lord gave me sons. I don't know. Sometimes I've wondered, because he had more flexibility sometimes to really, he coached all their sports and, never missed anything that they did. But my sons also have told me, they appreciated having a strong mom, a leader, someone who was out there doing things and modeling things. And their wives really appreciate me, because they say, you and Bobby raised sons that understand the way the genders are supposed to respect one another, and that it's a true blessed alliance and partnership, and that we appreciate you all for doing that. And they, they're the beneficiary of men who respect strong women, and women who have goals and dreams and careers outside of just the home, but saying the home is, I mean, my children came before anything, and at the same time, God allowed me to continue sharing my gifts with others as well.
I love that. I love that. So um, let's kind of start down that path. You opened the door a little bit to um, your leadership and management studies and the opportunities that you've had to employ a lot of that in the work that you've done. There's a common thread here. It seems to me. Was your undergraduate degree? Were we still calling it communication and human relations?
Hmm.
Uh,
You and I both products of that
yeah,
base.
and then I mean, you graduated from Trevecca in '85, and then within 2 years, you have a master's degree in organizational communication from University of Kansas out there in Lawrence. Did you enjoy that experience? I heard great things about it.
Oh yeah, at that point in time, they were a top 10 school in that field, and
Right.
so I really think I made a great choice to go out there. Now, Bobby and I were both Southern born and bred. He's from Savannah, Georgia, from the coast. I was born in Atlanta and then lived in North Carolina. We went out to Lawrence, Kansas, and that first winter was like record snowfall, record low temperatures for them, record wind chill, and we were like, "What have we done?" We were newlyweds and just shivered in our little apartment and froze to death. But it was a great experience. But we were just out there long enough for me to get the master's, and I had planned to stay for the doctorate out there,
Yeah.
and I could tell Bobby was already like, "Oh, get me back to the Southeast." And interestingly, I got a phone call from, the dean of the college who had been my dean, and then Dr. Strickland. I get a call from him, and then from Dr. Homer Adams,
Yeah.
who and love. Both of them, they had been the president and the dean while I'm a student, and they're calling and saying, would you consider, there is an opening in your department, communication studies department. Would you consider coming back, finding a doctorate here in town, and come back to your alma mater? And I think that when I left, I had always thought that I might return. I could tell the trajectory of my career was changing. I was not going to be the next Barbara Walters. And I did feel like Christian higher education, it had formed and shaped me so profoundly that I did want to give back. And so I took them up on their offer and came back too soon. When you're just 2 years older than students you're going to have in your classes, it was probably too soon. But I did find this amazing doctoral program, which really was a better fit for me. So again, God looks out for us at Peabody College of Vanderbilt University in human and organizational development.
Yeah, I was going to say the KU programs were largely communication theory based, if I remember correctly.
Correct.
And when you go to Vanderbilt, was that part of the Owen School as well, or you were at Peabody?
I was at Peabody, but it was an interesting time period. They were doing sort of a pilot project. And there was a lot of intersection between Owen School and then the Peabody School of Education, and they were piloting this HOD program, which now is a cornerstone program
Right.
at Vanderbilt, not only at the graduate level, but at the undergrad level now. But it
Right.
was a kind of a pilot graduate program. And it really was the model that then, I'm getting ahead of myself, but when I got to come back to Trevecca and help Dr. Welch with, with the EDD program at
Right.
Trevecca,
Yeah.
part of that was modeled after this cohort model, that I'd been able to go through at Vanderbilt. And they changed where it was not the traditional dissertation that was purely research based, but it was more the practice. It was
Right.
a project, an action based research project. And I loved, that fact too. So,
I would be interested. This is kind of wonky, and maybe uh, people who are involved in higher education will get more out of this than anybody. But I don't want to discount it for someone else. Those are three very different types of universities: Trevecca, KU and Vanderbilt. But were there some common threads? Were there some things that kind of ran through the middle of each of those experiences? Not to overplay that middle too much, but do a quick compare and contrast. Were there some commonalities there?
Yeah, well, certainly, I was at the right place at the right time, I think, in each of those arenas. And I, again, just credit God's guidance in my life. I would not have traded my undergrad years at a small private Christian university,
Yeah,
particularly Tribeca, for anything in the world. So foundational, just in all the layers of who I was, and I would not have gotten that same experience. I know now I wouldn't have gotten if I'd gone to UNC. A great school, but
right.
I wasn't ready for that. But by the time I finished Trevecca, I was a little concerned, I think, going to KU grad school, because again, at that point in time, it was competitive. They were a top 10 school in communication. And I thought, will my Trevecca experience hold up against all these people that I'm going to be in class
Yeah,
with, be, colleagues with in the graduate program, and they're coming from all these big name universities. And I felt like I stood up with all of them. And so then had a better appreciation of the actual education that I got at Trevecca. But I also know it was important for me at that time to be in a secular, if you will, university setting, to really begin to grow up and broaden my horizons and be exposed to a lot of things that maybe I wasn't ready to be exposed to, just even in my thinking, until after a good solid foundation. So I loved going there for graduate school. And then by the time I ended up at Vanderbilt, and I'll just say it, again, I had a son who went through there. I mean, Vanderbilt's one of the more liberal places you'll find on the planet. And again, just another opportunity to really, I just am a firm believer in, you can be grounded, you can have your feet centered in some core values, but let some winds blow by you that are gonna strengthen you by, really challenging you and at all kinds of levels. And I felt like I got that, but I also felt like I found within my cohort, you can find your people everywhere you go. And I found
yeah.
my people at KU, and I found my people, at Vanderbilt, and you can develop the relationships that can keep you centered and grounded while you're letting your mind just expand. And I'm thankful and grateful for all those three different types of exposure.
So you became. Thank you for explaining that. Those experiences, all of our life experiences, are shaping us as we move through it, and we don't know exactly. And if we did know exactly, it wouldn't be near as much fun, right?
That's right.
You start down this path because this is what, to this point in your life, has been seemed like the way to go. Somewhere along in there, you're hooking up with the Gallup organization to be one of the early people in Strengths Finder, and how you helped people embrace the strengths that they had rather than focus on the weaknesses. I still think that's a brilliant way to look at some of these personality profiles that people do. I I can't tell you what my Enneagram number is, because it seems like every time I take it, I get a different number. I don't know what that says about me, but StrengthsFinder really, it resonated with me.
Yeah.
How did you get involved with them? That was while you were at Trevecca, or was that a separate?
That was while I was at Trevecca. I don't know if you remember Chip Anderson, but Chip Anderson, who really had Nazarene roots, and then he was at other institutions of higher education. But he had,
UCLA in particular, right?
yes, yes, and then Azusa Pacific, and
Susan.
yeah, and he really became the champion, I think, within small Christian higher ed to utilize the Gallup Strengths Finder. And so I was privileged to really, I guess at the time, did so many things at Trevecca, but I was leading the freshman experience, is what it was called
Right.
at that time, or freshman.
Yeah.
And we were looking for fresh things to do. And so was privileged to go through some training on the Strengths Finder with Gallup and with Chip Anderson, and go down to Samford University in Birmingham was really catching onto it. Bob Brower and Corliss McGee were at Mid America, and they were catching the vision. And we all actually traveled to Samford to a conference. Just the quality movement and StrengthsFinder was kind of happening at the same time. I was living kind of in the TQM, total quality management movement, and those things were dovetailing. And yeah, I resonated with StrengthsFinder immediately. I felt like because I'm a student of that, I'd done every assessment there was to do out there, and this one was unique. And I did get the opportunity then to be mentored by Don Clifton it's called the
Oh,
Clifton
okay.
StrengthsFinder now.
Yeah.
Don himself was a genius, and he was chair of the Gallup organization, also a fantastic man of faith, Christian, and I was gifted an opportunity to go out there and do their executive leadership development, and where you go deeper on that. So I became a certified strengths coach because I loved it so much. But it started um, with some opportunities at Trevecca to get that training through Chip Anderson.
So I love. I mean, I was here. I came back in 1997. I, I we were in Oklahoma 1992 to 97. So I was here when you came, and I got back before you left. But something began to stir in you shortly after, as antiquated as this sounds, after the turn of the century. You know what I mean, right? I mean, early 2000s. You made quite a transition out of higher ed into local church ministry. What was
Yeah,
going on?
no one was more surprised by that than me. um, I really thought when I came back to Trevecca, I mean, you could slit my wrist and I would bleed purple. I just
Yeah,
thought I am going to die here. I'll be the next Barbara McLean. Although she ended up leaving at one point. We didn't think that would happen, and she got married late in life and left.
yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
I just thought I'd be one of the lifers at Trevecca. But I was a serious disciple of Christ. And while I was doing what I loved and I was very happy where I was, I was doing just serious Bible study and began to feel stirred that God was calling me to preach. And Michael, I resisted it. I did not want to be a woman preacher. I think there had not been good models growing up, and I just it's not who I was. I didn't think it was who I was. Even I would go back to when Julie and I came to Trevecca together. We adored one another. We were so different. She immediately knew she wanted to do social work,
Yeah.
and worked then with child protective services. And that was not I was still thinking of the business side, really, of communication, organizational communication, leadership, all those things. And again, I'd never wanted to be a preacher,
Yeah.
but I had fallen in love with scripture, and I was a teacher, and I loved teaching the word. And I taught the same Sunday school class at Hermitage Church of the Nazarene for 25 years, if that tells you anything. I loved teaching and teaching the word, but I just hadn't thought about a pastoral calling or a preaching calling. And literally, you mentioned Gallup. While I was out in Lincoln, Nebraska, in September of 2001, um, and I was in a leadership focused session that was all about me. It was about my strengths, my gifts. They're giving me all the
Yeah.
reports of all my stuff, really trying to help me figure out what does the next decade of my life look like, because they knew I was kind of wrestling with a call. And a lot of well-meaning people had tried to talk me out of this call. There were well-meaning people who said, oh, no, 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 your gifts, you're supposed to stay in higher ed, or you're supposed to do this, you're
Yeah.
supposed to do that, but you're not supposed to go into pastoral ministry and ministry in the church. And they assigned me a former pastor and minister as my coach, and he really understood, and we were fleshing it out. And we walked out of his office on the morning of 9/11. And when we walked out of his office, the Gallup organization, the headquarters then was in a big rectangle, and in all four corners they had a giant life-size jumbotron, because they always like to watch the Gallup poll tick across it and all that. So think about these giant jumbotrons in all four corners of this building, and we walk out to this eerie silence, except you could hear people weeping, and you looked, and people, wherever they were frozen, and they had their eyes glued to one of those jumbotrons. And we walked out right at the time that the second plane went into the second tower. And literally, I had my answer. I mean, the Lord basically, in the sweet way that he doesn't beat you up over it, but he just kind of said, see why I'm calling you? Like, the harvest is ripe, and the workers are few, and I need you. And I know he didn't really need me, but he let me sense that he needed me. And I answered the call that day
That's
to
amazing.
pastor and preach. And it was a process of leaving Trevecca, because I didn't leave for another year.
Yeah.
But it was clear what I was to do. And so I had to go process leaving a place that I loved and going to a place that I knew nothing about. Other than having experienced, always being ministered to.
Right.
And it was incredible to just go to know what that Abraham call almost was. I'm asking you to leave a place and leave a place that you know and love well, and go to a place you don't know much about. And it was a great leap of faith. And then this is another place where my husband's such a hero, because I had to come home and say, guess what? God is telling me I need to leave my very secure place of employment and income,
Yeah.
and go volunteer a year at our own local church. I heard a very specific call, not just to pastor and preach, but while you're training, while you're going and getting ordained and you're training, you're going to go and volunteer a year of your service at your church, and then see what I will do. And I thought, and so did the pastor at the time, thought that, oh, God is just claiming your organizational management and organizational leadership gifts, because I went to a church that was growing. We had a pastor that it was really growing, but we didn't necessarily have the infrastructure in place to handle that growth. And so I did start as community life pastor to sort of help put some of that structure, but those were just the bridge gifts. And then God said, no, I'm also claiming your teaching gifts, and you're going to preach. And so I went and did all that.
And you did that for how many years?
I was there for 14 years on that pastoral staff. So I tell people a lot of times that God gets very specific with me. And, I thought I'd be a lifer at Trevecca. And then after about a dozen years, he remade me. And then I thought I'd be a lifer at Hermitage Church. And then after about 14 years, really 10 years into it, he started remaking me, but he gave me a little longer time to kind of detach. But it was as a result of that preaching and pastoral ministry that God began to call me to what I'm doing right now.
And I know just from knowing you a little bit, and reading again about some of the things that you ultimately have gotten into the middle of now, and we're gonna really turn toward these last few years with this amazing work that God has led you to. But you went on am I right? You went on a trip. Was that with Hermitage, or was that another group? You went to Africa at one point, right? Kenya, maybe?
I did. That was in 2012, though. That's a little ahead of the 2011. June 2011. I'll start there. June 2011. I'd been at Hermitage for 10 years in pastoral ministry, associate pastoral ministry, and they were going to gift me a summer sabbatical for my 10 years of service. And it was really great timing, because I was wrestling again. God was starting to stir this new well, I'll tell you this. I had been leading our congregation as the community life pastor. All of our small groups have been going through that book by David Platt called Radical. And the subtitle of it was Taking Back Our Faith from the American Dream. And that was in 2011. And I would just tell you that book was prophetic. It's more relevant today than it's ever been. But this idea of we have to take back our faith from the American dream. And it was really challenging us to consider, how have we allowed our culture to almost manipulate our understanding of the gospel? And are we going to get radical and really live like Jesus said his followers would live, where
Yeah.
you abandon everything, and you're all about, the gospel to the last and the least and the lost. And so it was really challenging me leading our congregation through it. And then I had been also reading Half the Sky, which is the book that broke my heart about the issue of human trafficking and sex trafficking in particular. And so again, all these things were colliding and I needing to wrestle this to the mat. And so I took an opportunity during my sabbatical to do a silent retreat up at the monastery in Kentucky, the
Yeah.
Abbey of Gethsemane. And that experience, I came home from that experience. God basically founded RestStop Ministries there in that garden. It's a replica of the Garden of Gethsemane. And so here I'm watching Jesus agonize over his Father's will, and I'm agonizing over my Father's will of, am I really, are you really asking me to do something big in this arena? Can't I just, but then it was the following year, the Africa trip you're talking about in 2012, while I'm wrestling this thing to the mat. I know God has founded RestStop Ministries in this garden. He named it. He told me everything, but I'm figuring out, okay, how do I make this happen? And I was invited to be part of this Kenya gender-based violence project that the Church of the Nazarene was doing with Jim Koppel. I don't know if you know him. SAI, Servant Forge, was leading it. And at the time, she wasn't our general superintendent, but Dr. Carla Sundberg was part of the same group. There were several of us who were asked to just be a part of kind of a steering committee. And the Church of the Nazarene was partnering with UNICEF, and they were just looking at the issue of gender-based violence in Kenya. So I went on that trip in 2012 while all these other things were stirring. And just again, the Lord just brought it all together because we saw all the atrocities that, here, I'll be honest. At the time, I was serving as the chair of the Women Clergy Council of our denomination, but it wasn't really global at that point. It was more, we were serving women clergy in USA, Canada. And even though we had a long way to go in terms of empowering women, even though our polity has always been that we ordained women since 1901, our practice didn't always keep up with our polity. And we were in a season then of low numbers of women clergy and trying to ask all the questions why and trying to empower. And I loved working in that arena and trying to empower my sisters. We were trying to break the stained glass ceiling, if you will. But I was doing that at the same time. Then I had this trip to Kenya and I saw my sisters over there, my global sisters, just in dire situations, so much different. And I thought, I don't know that I can continue to just advocate for wealthy North American women to be empowered in their clergy service when all this other stuff is happening around the globe to my sisters, genital mutilation and the sex trafficking and the acid burnings and the honor killings and the, all the things and the things we saw in Nairobi, in Kenya, where Nairobi was the only place where there was a gender-based violence hospital that tended to the unique issues of women who had experienced gender-based violence. And I got to meet a woman named Margaret and her 6-year-old daughter, Grace. And this is horrific, but both of them had to travel from the northwest corner of Kenya up in the Lodwar area, all the way down to Nairobi. And for impoverished people, just that travel is so difficult. And they were both there. The mother and the daughter had been so violently gang raped and abused that they were both there to have reconstructive surgery, a mother and her 6-year-old daughter. And Carla Sundberg and I got to go in the hospital room and talk to Margaret and talk to Grace and try to minister to them. And so, yeah, I went home from that and it's like, okay, we cannot waste any more time. Like, not on my watch. This can't happen. And so the Lord just began to give me some ways I wasn't called to the mission field, but it was find out what's happening right here in your backyard, because it's in every zip code where you live. And what are you going to do about it?
That's an amazing story. And a perfect segue, I think, now to be a little more specific about what RestStop Ministries is. I'm going to pop this logo up here for people to see. And the idea of rest. You're talking about that mother and daughter and the arduous journey they had just to get to where you were, where you met them. The idea of rest for people for whom the pain and the sorrow is relentless. I just I'm so moved by it. I'm moved by looking at the logo that
Yeah, I'm moved by looking at it right now too, just as you say that, because yes, when I told you God named it when I was in that garden at the Abbey, and He said, your mission and your vision is right there in that name. Rest, restore these precious survivors, and yes, give them rest from the horrific chaos of their lives. And it's going to be a rest that is going to only come from me, the true rest. And He said, stop this horrific criminal oppression and this brutal treatment of women. And then He put the two together and He said, rest stop, you're going to provide a rest stop on their journey, just as you said, Michael. It's like it's going to be an oasis on this desert wilderness journey that they've had, and you're going to provide them a resting place, a place to stop the madness of their life and come and find genuine rest and healing. So yes, it had so many layers. And after that 2012 Kenya experience, to then just, oh God, you are so far ahead of me, and you named it well before I fully understood what it was that you were asking me to do. And He said, you're going to provide a safe sanctuary for the healing of these women, and that's how you're going to stop this oppression, even if it's just one woman at a time. You'll be stopping it when you're pulling them out of that life, and you're removing them from the ownership of a cruel trafficker or pimp, and you're disrupting the crime by removing them. But then you're really supposed to focus on the restorative piece, because who better than the church? God makes sense in hindsight. A lot of times we're trying to figure it out ahead of time, and He knows what He's doing if we'll just follow. But then in hindsight, we're like, oh yeah, I get it. You called me to ministry first. You called me from the higher education arena. You gave me all this theological and biblical training, and you gave me a heart for ministry and pastoring. And then you're saying, now you're going to minister to a different kind of flock. We're going to really stretch you, but you're going to use all of that, and it's going to come together in this. And I'm telling you to, I'm a rescue. Jesus, I'm a rescuer. I'm a deliverer. I'm a liberator. I'm a liberator of women. You're going to find these women, and you're going to do all these things in my name. And so we said, yeah, who better than the church to provide this lavish biblical hospitality, to show them the lavish love of Christ. And I could cry. I'm trying not to cry. I'm a crier, but I'm trying not to cry all through this. But when I think about, again, how this circles back to my dear friend Julie, when we traveled on the impact team, she always did a reading, a dramatic monologue, and it was based on those scriptures in John, in the letters of John, about how He loves us lavishly. And I think I heard her voice, in my head, about what kind of place that we were supposed to provide. And it was supposed to be lavish love, and a place where, just as the women walked on the campus, they would feel their worth. Like, we did everything we could to make this such a beautiful space and a healing space, so that they would feel their worth and know, you're doing something really hard and really courageous, but we believe that you're worth it.
yeah.
And whatever difficulties we have trying to do this work, it's all worth it. Because if only for one, He
I
left the 99 to go find the one.
I love it so much, and I've said it in probably 2 or 3 segments already, or episodes, talking about how we get so busy trying to change the world. I mean, you went to Kenya and you're thinking, what can I do for these people over here? And God's preparing you to do something for people just literally a couple of miles away from where you were living at the time. And And that brings me to the idea of home, the vagabond experience that, you know, particularly women are facing when they're being trafficked, and the way they get moved around, and they never feel like they have a place that they can call home. And then you get the opportunity. Was this the uh, let me make sure I get this up right here. Was this the first home you were given? Is Marion's house? Is that the first
Yeah,
one?
we actually received both at the same time, 2 beautiful homes that sit on 25 acres, and this is the first house, the front house we call it of the property, and it is Marion's house, and then this is Laura's house, and it sits back farther on the 25 acres. But yeah, I won't tell all the details, Michael, but the story behind even God leading us to this property, it's exactly what you said. What is front and center in that story is that Marion and Marion was the matriarch of the family members that kind of lived, it was families that lived on the 25 acres. And the parents, Marion and John, lived in this home. And one of their daughters, Laura, lived with her family in the other home. And Marion was the kind of woman who she said everybody needs a place, just what you said. She said everybody needs a place and everybody needs a home. And she was a wonderful they spent a lot of years in the Nazarene family, and she was always loved to mentor the younger women and pour into them. And she was very much a homemaker, and everybody had their place around the table. And in fact, if you didn't have a place, she would make a place around her table. Her daughters told me when we first started talking about getting this property, her daughter said, Mom was the kind of woman who we'd all come home as adults, and when we were coming back home for Thanksgiving, everybody's sort of whispering, "Does anybody know who that is sitting in there in the living room?" And it's like, "Oh, just somebody Mom met at Walmart today, and they didn't have anywhere to go for Thanksgiving dinner, and so she invited them." That's the kind of person she was, and tragically, Marion lost her life in a tragedy that happened on that property, and it was a tragedy that had many layers that left broken family members. And when God first, through mutual friends, connected us, they told me, you know, when you started talking to us about what it was you might want the property for, it was our first sign of hope that kind of lifted our chin. We had been devastated by this tragedy, and we thought, can anything good come from this? Because it was a tragedy that had just some evil intent. And they just said, we said when we walked off this property that day, God will redeem it. We don't know how. God will redeem this land, this property, this. And literally, when we felt like God was saying, you're going to serve some survivors of a different kind. You think I've called you only to serve these human trafficking survivors, but before you even get there, the way I'm going to get you there is you're going to serve these survivors who also need to have their hope restored, that there is a redeemer and that good can come, that beauty can come from ashes. And so literally, when we all talked about this possibility, they said, our mother would love nothing more than for this to be the legacy of the property that she named Good Hope Farms. So if you hear us talk about Good Hope Farms, we are RestStop Ministries, but the property is Good Hope Farms because she named it, and she told her children, "Oh, we don't just have hope, we have a good hope, and his name is Jesus." And they were very clear. Mom named this property Good Hope Farms, and she knew that he's the anchor to all hope. And we just said, no brainer. What better name for what we plan to do here? We plan to grow hope, cultivate hope in these women's lives. And I will even tell you this. I wish I'd sent you this picture, Michael, but there was a century-old barn on this property that was dilapidated and falling down. I had romantic notions of restoring the barn, because I thought, restore survivors, we're going to restore this barn. But some things just have to die and be resurrected. And then it's like that scripture, when a seed falls to the ground, it has to die, but then it will multiply.
Yeah.
The barn was beyond restoring, but we did dismantle the barn. And now we're making things with the barn wood, and the women are learning how to do that, and we're selling things, and it has a redemptive purpose. But here's the thing: we found in that old barn, when we took over the property, we found an old revival sign. It was like one of those big old wooden signs that had a hinge, like you would put it on the side of a barn, where it would go on the corner and both sides. Huge revival here, it said in big red letters. It was a yellow sign, revival here. We had revival when we found that revival sign in that barn, because again, we said, that's what's going to happen here. Revival here. That is what's going to happen here at Good Hope Farms and RestStop Ministries. And it has just been one God story after another like that. He who calls us is faithful. And when God called me to this work, and I'll tell you, Michael, I've done hard things in my life, but this is the hardest work I've ever done. You have to protect your staff from secondary trauma, because you live with so much trauma, and these stories are so horrific, and you take it on. But I told God, okay, you're calling us out of nothing. I mean, I love that old Hebrew phrase, ex nihilo, out of nothing. God creates out of nothing. You're calling us out of nothing. I didn't have the slightest idea what you were doing. And so you're going to have to provide. You're going to have to provide. It's yours, God. And he has done it. He has provided. He has sustained us. Every time we're ready for that next thing, he just drops the next resource in our lap. We don't have time. That old song, if ocean were ink and, I had a quill, I can't write all of what's happening at RestStop Ministries. It's just amazing.
Well, put the I put the web address up there for folks who are able to watch, but I'll just let you know, if you go to RestStop Ministries, all one word, reststopministries.org, you can find out a lot more about what all's going on at Good Hope Farm and at RestStop. And Rondy, I probably need to cut this off before I just absolutely lose it. I'm so moved by not just what you've done, but who you are and who you've been in the lives of so many people. And I know that over the course of this conversation, it's been clear that each of the passages in life that you have been through, and I think this is true for all of us, whatever we find ourselves in the middle of right now, it's because of the decisions that we've made along the way, not knowing what this decision is going to ultimately imply for our lives. But my boys and I say this to each other a lot, and and I'll say this again for my wife's sake. She said, Michael, you've always been about trying to save the world. God sends people across our path every day. Do something for the person that's in front of you, and maybe their world will change in the process. And with my boys, it's do the next right thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just keep doing the next right thing. And it feels like that's what you've been able to do. And
Well, I want to echo one thing. I know we got to cut it off, but I want people to know God's call is dynamic. It's not static. And so,
right.
you know, uh, just he says follow. Jesus' favorite word was follow me. And his first word to his disciples was come and see, follow. So if as long as we're living in tune with him and we're following where he is leading, he may remake us several times. But every season is important. Like you said, no season is wasted. And it's just what we even tell the women at Rest Stop. God's not going to waste any of your pain. He did not cause that pain. The pain you've been caused is because we live in a fallen world, and evil has been allowed to hurt you. But God is going to redeem it, and he is not going to waste any of your pain. And I feel like in life's decisions and seasons, as you said, in passages, God's not wasted one thing that I've ever done. He's just brought it all together in this beautiful new thing. And I believe he'll do that for anybody who will just follow him.
I can't say it any better than that. Thank you so much for being here with me. And I hope,
Sacred privilege. Thank you for the invitation.
yeah, I hope great things continue. I know they will continue to happen for you and all that you guys do. Give my best to Bobby. He's a dear friend as well. And
We appreciate you. And Sarah, we were neighbors.
yeah,
And we never got together while we were in the same neighborhood. Now I'm just down the road, though.
take care, Rondy.
Take
Thanks
care.
for tuning in, folks. We'll see you next time here on Michael in the Middle.